This is music, and this is a completely unoriginal video. So the hate train is a rollin' in the vinyl/music community, at least in the metal parts of it. It started with 10 terrible albums in your collection. That was a thread. Now it's 10 terrible songs from 10 killer albums. So that's a thread that's going on right now. And both of those threads have generated a lot of videos that I've really enjoyed watching. Because I think it's interesting to hear why people don't like something, especially if it's why they don't like something I really like, because it's just interesting to get other perspectives on things, right? And so I've enjoyed watching a lot of those videos, although many of them have really trashed albums and songs I really like, but that's just interesting. Now the problem to me is I can't jump on this hate train because, first of all, I don't have 10 albums in my collection that I consider terrible, right? I actually tried making a 10 terrible albums video, and when I went back and listened to some of these albums, I realized that I actually kind of enjoy them now, so that went out the window. And I know I can't make a 10 terrible songs from 10 killer albums video because that would just be populated by power ballads, so that would be boring. So I figured, okay, I'm just gonna go in the opposite direction, join the love train, and do the most unoriginal topic ever. 10 albums that everybody hates that you love. And I can't even get that right because in my case it's 10 hated albums that I like, not necessarily that I love. So there you go. So let's just get down to business, and take the sort of obvious first, and the obvious one, and get it out of the way. Celtic Frost, Cold Lake. Celtic Frost were known for being a really, really dark band. Their first couple of releases were, especially if you include the Hellhammer stuff, were primitive, raw, dirty, proto, extreme metal releases, and then they took their music in a more avant-garde direction, but still very dark. And then suddenly this one came out. Cold Lake, with an obnoxious pink and purple color scheme. Very obnoxious band photo. Teased hair. Dude who doesn't even know how to zip his jeans. Looking very sleazy overall. Obviously trying to appeal to a more mainstream audience where, glam metal and things like that were becoming popular at this time. So they wanted to appeal to that, and they made songs called Seduce Me Tonight, Petty Obsession, Juices Like Wine, Dance Sleazy, so it's presented in a very glam and sleazy way. And then obviously all their fans hated it because of that. And also the music isn't that dark either. But I would say musically this is not glam metal, it's not sleaze metal, it's just traditional heavy metal, and actually it's not that bad music wise, and I would say it does retain one aspect of the darkness of Celtic Frost. That's the vocals, because I think they tried to make Tom Warrior sound sleazy, but to be honest he sounds more creepy to me, right? Him singing Seduce Me Tonight just sounds creepy, and I actually kind of like that. It adds a creepy feel to the music. So this is an album, I don't love it. It's not my favorite Celtic Frost album at all. My favorite Celtic Frost album is probably another shocker, but I'll save that for another day. But I like it, I enjoy listening to it. I actually quite like the song Once They Were Eagles, I think, which is one of the most hated songs on this album. So Celtic Frost, Cold Lake, hated for being a glam/sleaze metal album, but for my money, it's just a kind of almost like standard traditional heavy metal album that I enjoy listening to. Uh, the band hate it so much that they have refused to reissue it. So I was actually happy to find a vinyl copy recently. I also have a CD copy. So there you go. The next one is probably not a hated album, but it's often considered at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to all things Iron Maiden. Maybe along with the Blaze Bayley albums. Unfairly, I think, because I think the X Factor is actually a pretty good album. The Virtual 11, not so much for my money, but No Prayer for the Dying, hated by a lot of people. It has a more scaled down sound to it. They decided to record it in a barn. Bruce Dickinson went away from the operatic air rain style way of singing and went in the direction of a more raspy rock and roll kind of singing style. The production is not the greatest, and this is the first album without Adrian Smith on guitars. And full disclosure, Adrian Smith, my favorite guitarist of all time. Iron Maiden, my favorite band of all time. A lot of people dislike this album because it's not as good as the albums that came before it, which are considered like the first golden era of Iron Maiden. I don't think it's as good as Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. I don't think it's as good as Somewhere in Time, because that's my favorite album of all time. I don't think it's as good as any of the albums that came before it, but I think it's still a very good album. I consider this the last album of the first golden era of Iron Maiden. I include it in the first golden era of Iron Maiden. Yeah, it does have kind of silly songs like Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter and Holy Smoke, right? And I think because they are more like kind of like silly, I think that's why a lot of people hate this album too. I don't mind those songs. I kind of enjoy them. It has Hooks in You, which is another more kind of rock song rather than a metal song. It's actually co-written by Adrian Smith. Not my favorite song on the album. So it has those kind of like, not great songs in my opinion, but still kind of enjoyable. But it does also have Mother Russia, which I think is an Iron Maiden epic, although it's not as long as the other epic songs, but I really like that song. It has The Assassin, which I also like. It's a great, almost like song with a certain kind of like intensity to it. Tail Gunner. It's not Aces High, but it's, in the same sort of theme, and I like it. It's kind of like almost like upbeat, strangely enough. The title track is one of my favorite Iron Maiden tracks. Interestingly enough, because it's a ballad, and I don't like ballads normally, but the title track here is great, I think. Even sort of the more filler songs like Fate's Warning and Public Enema #1, I enjoy those. So I think this is a very good album. I don't hate it. I like it. For my money, it's the last album in the first golden era. Yeah, the weakest one in the golden era, but it's part of it for my money. The next one here, I've made an entire video on this, Onslaught in Search of Sanity. This one was hated by pretty much all thrash metal fans back in the day because they took their music in a much more melodic and polished direction. Prior to this, their music was raw, dirty, punky. They started out as a punk band, so they had punk elements to it. Here, they hired Steve Grimmett, a vocalist who can sing, melodic vocalist. They took the music itself in a more melodic direction, and the compositions were actually more complex. And of course, there's an AC/DC cover song that everybody hates. There is the opening track, which is just like weird droning keyboard tones, and is really long. So a lot of people dislike this album for those reasons. What's interesting is that these are the reasons, maybe not the weird keyboard intro, although I actually enjoy listening to it. But the singer, the melodic direction, the AC/DC cover, those are the things that got me into Onslaught and make me really appreciate this album. For my money, this should be a thrash metal classic, up there with, you know, some of the best of Anthrax's albums. Just putting it out there. It's not among the living, right? It's not all the way up there, but it's in that direction. You know what I mean? I really enjoy this album. For my money, it's almost a thrashed piece. Yeah, I'm sorry to say. I know everybody's gonna hate me for this. I don't care. I like this album. So these were the vinyls. The rest is gonna be CDs. This one, I've shown this before. I've mentioned this before. Mötley Crüe by Mötley Crüe. Everybody, or not everybody, but the core fan base hated this one because it did not have Vince Neil on vocals. It had John Corabi. And they took their music in a darker, heavier, more groovy, admittedly more 90s alternative rock, 90s hard rock, 90s, even grunge maybe, inspired direction. And people hated it. I love it. It's my favorite Mötley Crüe album because it's so heavy, because it has John Corabi on vocals. I'm not a big fan of Vince Neil. I don't hate Vince Neil, but I'm not a big fan of Vince Neil. I do love their first couple of releases, and I also love Dr. Feelgood. But that's my favorite Mötley Crüe album. Hated by the core fan base. The next one is a similar story. Anthrax, Sound of White Noise. They decided to take their music in a darker direction. They decided to take inspiration from the groove metal scene and from the alternative rock, alternative metal scene. I would say this is an alternative metal album. They brought in John Bush from Armored Saint, who has a darker voice. And a lot of people hated this one because of that, because they went in a more groove, alternative metal direction. What's interesting to me is that I tried getting into Anthrax before this one. I really tried. I went to the local music library in Odense, where I grew up. I picked up The Persistence of Time. I picked up Attack of the Killer Bees. I picked up, I think they even had A Fistful of Metal. And I picked up State of Euphoria. I think they had that one as well. And I did this several times. Went back, listened to him. I just couldn't get into it. Then I heard Only, and I heard Room for One More. I think they played them on Headbangers Ball back when MTV actually was less shitty. When the M stood for music. It stood for music. Anyways, I checked them out on Headbangers Ball. I really liked them. I really liked Room for One More. It was heavy, it was groovy. So this album got me into Anthrax. Then, many years later, I was watching a documentary about thrash metal, and they showed some snippets from the Indians music video from Among the Living. And for some reason, Among the Living had gone completely under my radar. So they played those snippets, and I thought that sounds pretty cool. So I actually went and watched the entire Indians video, and I thought that this is brilliant. This is like almost like a masterpiece. I just went out and I just bought Among the Living on CD, and I loved all the songs on it. So I decided, you know what, I'm just gonna go back. I'm gonna get whatever I can from the Joey Belladonna era before this and listen to it. Persistence of Time, State of Euphoria, Spreading the Disease, whatever I could get my hands on, and then it clicked with me. So now this is my least favorite Anthrax album, because now I'm a Joey Belladonna era guy, but I still have a soft spot for this album, and I still love Only and Room for One More and all the other songs on it. But now, yeah, Among the Living, one of my favorite albums. Not a weak song on that, but strangely enough, it's thanks to this one that I finally got into Anthrax. The next one is Carcass Swan Song. Carcass themselves have said everybody hates this album. Carcass were before this, and they're back to that. An extreme metal band. They started out a grindcore band, then they became a death metal band. Then they kind of invented, or at least contributed to inventing melodic death metal. And then suddenly they released this album, which is just a heavy metal album. They even describe it as a rock album. The only trace of extreme metal that's left on it is the harsh vocals. So that's why some people consider it a death and roll album. So everybody hated this album when it came out because it was just a rock album. I don't hate it. It's not my favorite Carcass album. That's necroticism. But I really like this album. I think the songs have a good sort of energy to it. They're uplifting, a lot of them. Some of them are groovy. The two first songs are very good, I think. Like Keep On Rotting in the Free World, great title too, a parody there. And Tomorrow Belongs to Nobody. Great stuff. Great rock and metal. I enjoy this album. I like listening to this album. It's my least favorite Carcass album, but it's an enjoyable album. I think it's good. Okay. Up next, Turbo by Judas Priest. This is a very similar story, I think, to the Celtic Frost one. Judas Priest, legendary heavy metal band. Great stuff from the 70s, great stuff from the 80s. Then this one comes out, and on the band photo they have teased hair. They look like a glam metal band. The music is more commercial sounding. They do use, because it's from 86, right? So synth guitars and guitar synthesizers effects had become kind of popular. They experimented with this. The songs on this album are more like hard rock songs than heavy metal songs. But you know what? This is the album that got me into Judas Priest. I picked it up from the same music library. I liked it, and I still like it. Painkiller is my favorite Priest album. This is my second favorite Priest album. What you gonna do about it? I don't care. I love this album. I have great memories of listening to this album because I copied it to cassette. And listening to this album while being on road trips with my dad and with my brother. Because my parents are great. They always supported me and my brother. Even when both of us decided we're going to go into heavy metal, listen to heavy metal music. My parents supported us. My parents went, oh, you want to listen to the Judas Priest cassette while we were going on a road trip? You want to listen to this Iron Maiden cassette? Yes, great, let's do it. So I have fond memories. So to me, a lot of this music is great music for going on road trips, for being on the go. Right? Even the people who like this album, they always pick out some songs they think are weak. For my money, no weak song on this album. I like all the songs. Even the cheesy shit like Private Property and Parental Guidance, Out in the Cold, right? Wild Nights, Hot and Crazy Days. Hot for Love even, which is sleazy as it gets. I love those songs. And Turbo Lover, I think, is a great song. The way it's composed is great. It sort of builds up. And you know what? I asked KK Downing, not in person, but he had a website, I don't know if he still has it, called Downing Street, and you could sort of send them emails, and maybe if you were lucky they would answer your emails. I sent him a question asking about Turbo Lover, what made them compose it the way they did, and you know what? He answered me. I got a personal answer, still kind of a cut and paste one, but I got a personal answer from somebody running the KK Downing site. And it was like sort of like an encouraging, put your mind to it and you can write a great song, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? I got an answer from KK Downing about Turbo Lover. I like this album. I don't care what anybody says. Now, just some honorable mentions here. Everybody hates these two albums, Jugulator, Demolition. The two Ripper Owens albums. You know what? They're not bad. Jugulator is actually a very good album for my money. I think Jugulator is better than Point of Entry. There you go. People just hate these albums because Ripper Owens is not Rob Halford. Same thing with Iron Maiden, right? People hate the two Blaze Bayley albums because Blaze Bayley is not Bruce Dickinson. And you know what? Ripper Owens is a great singer. You know what else? Blaze Bayley, great singer. His solo material is awesome. In all honesty, I don't like Virtual 11, but I do like The X Factor. Anyways, these two, right? I think they're good albums. Sure, they try to take the music in a more sort of contemporary direction at the time, and it doesn't work in all the songs, but I really enjoy those two albums. I don't care what anybody says. Okay, back to the list. Away from metal into the world of pop. Now, this is not a hated album because it was a great hit album in the 80s because of Invisible Touch, the main title, and of course Land of Confusion. But before this, Genesis were a legendary prog rock band. A lot of the original fans had already left them when Peter Gabriel left. Whoever stayed left when this one came out, because this is when they realized, okay, this is not a prog band anymore, it's a pop band. So it's hated by the core or the original fan base. I don't hate this album. I'm not old enough to have been part of the original fan base. I'm young enough that this was my introduction to Genesis. I like Land of Confusion. I like Invisible Touch. I don't like In Too Deep. That's too cheesy for me. But you know what? There's still some almost prog-like songs on this album. Tonight, 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 a dark, very dark, ominous ballad, moody. And Domino, a long song, also very dark. Not a lot of changes going on in it, but it sort of keeps going in the same groove, and they add some things to it, some scary sound effects. So it's dark and moody, very long. I think that's a progressive kind of pop song, to be honest. You have Throwing It All Away, another ballad, which I think is better than Into Deep. And you have The Brazilian, which is a crazy instrumental. I think this is a good 80s pop rock album. I understand why it became a hit. I like this album. I also like their prog stuff, of course, but I like this album. I do not hate it. The next album is a similar story, a prog band going pop. That's Yes, and I can never remember the title, 125. Now, originally, this was not supposed to be a Yes album. The band had kind of split up and some of the members had formed a band called Cinema, and they wanted to release an album. The label said, but you gotta call it a Yes album, so they did. The big hit from this album is Owner of a Lonely Heart, which I gotta be honest, I think that's a great pop rock song with a really heavy sounding guitar, and the riff is actually brilliant. But when this came out, it was to the shock and horror of all the original Yes as a prog band fans, so they hated this. The rest of the world didn't, because Owner of a Lonely Heart became a great hit. Most of the other songs on this album, although they did make videos for some of them, I don't think they're that well known. And that's a shame, because we're actually dealing with very sophisticated, and I would say prog-leaning pop rock here. I would say a song like Changes is actually a progressive song. And you have other songs like Hold On and Leave It and It Can Happen, Our Song, City of Love Hearts. All the songs, actually, apart from Owner of a Lonely Heart, are sophisticated pop rock songs. This is a band that still treats the pop song as a piece of art, unlike much pop music today, which is just utter shit. This is a good pop rock album. I don't care what anybody says. I love this album. Okay, the last one is the album that will get me lynched, and I don't give a shit. I don't hate this album. Saint Anger by Metallica. I don't love this album. I kind of like this album. This came after Load and Reload, which to me, I know a lot of people grew up with those albums and they love them, and of course, that's great, all power to you. I grew up with 80s Metallica. Then Load and Reload come out, and to me, both of them are just loads of garbage. Loads of shit, right? I dislike those albums because to me they're pretentious, right? It's just like the band trying to sound like a 90s alternative rock band. I know Anthrax tried to do the same thing with the Sound of White Noise, but they actually made something good of it for my money. It seemed genuine. The Load and Reload just don't seem genuine to me, to be honest. Then this one comes out. I didn't even know it was out. I went to a record store called Fan Rock with a good friend of mine. It's gone out of business. It happened a long time ago. And so wait, that's a new Metallica album. So I listened to it on their listening station, and I only got through Frantic and Saint Anger. They were fast, and I thought, okay, this is Metallica actually playing fast metal again. So I just bought it, took it home, listened to it, enjoyed it a lot. I don't enjoy it as much now as I did back then, because then Death Magnetic came out, which I think is much better. But yes, the snare drum sounds like crap. Yeah, no guitar solos. Why? I mean, Kirk Hammett's wah wah solos. Why not? There's a Metallica trademark. James Hetfield going off key, alternative singing. Yeah, Bob Rock being a dickhead probably, and the entire turmoil that you see in Some Kind of Monster. It has all those issues, but I just Load Reload garbage. I hate those albums. This comes out, right? That's the redemption for me, Metallica wise. I still really like listening to Frantic. I still really like Saint Anger. I still like Some Kind of Monster. It's like heavier and groovier. Invisible Kid, I still think is a great song. Shoot Me Again, kind of dumb, but also kind of fun song. So I enjoy listening to this album. I know I should hate it, right? Metallica fans are supposed to hate this album. I don't hate it, I enjoy it. I hate Load, I hate Reload. Lulu doesn't count as a Metallica album for my money. It's kind of like, Lulu is kind of like a fun listen. You can enjoy it ironically, right? It's insane, but it's worth it. James Hetfield singing I Am the Table. This here, not a great album. Maybe not even a good album, but I enjoy it. The production is crap. The singing is garbage. The lack of guitar solos is sad. The turmoil they went through is also kind of sad. But you know what? I still enjoy listening to Saint Anger. I don't hate it. I don't care what anybody says. So there you go. A completely unoriginal video. Maybe with a shocker towards the end. I don't know. But there you go. Now, as I said, I don't feel like I can sort of join the ongoing hate train right now, but I would really recommend that you go and watch all those 10 terrible albums from my collection videos, and also 10 terrible songs from 10 killer albums. As I said, it's interesting to hear people talking about why they don't like certain things, and especially when they talk about why they don't like things that you like. It's a good challenge, right? To just keep your cool, to stay objective, to accept and respect other people's opinions. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this completely unoriginal video. Thanks for watching.